Toxic people don't destroy lives because they are powerful. They destroy lives because most people never learn how to deal with them. They are everywhere. In workplaces, in families, in friendships, even in romantic relationships. Some appear loud and aggressive. Others are subtle, charming, and difficult to identify. But they all operate using the same hidden mechanism. They feed on your attention, your emotions, and your willingness to tolerate behavior you should never accept. Most people believe toxic individuals win because they are manipulative or cruel. But the deeper reality is far more uncomfortable. Toxic people gain power when you react in predictable ways. When you argue with them, they gain attention. When you try to explain yourself, they gain control. When you feel guilty for setting boundaries, they gain influence. Without realizing it, many people spend years trapped in emotional battles that drain their confidence, damage their relationships, and distract them from building the life they actually want. But what if the problem was never the toxic person? What if the real problem was that no one ever taught you the psychological strategies needed to neutralize them? This audiobook is not about changing toxic people. That battle almost never succeeds. Instead, it is about something far more powerful. You will learn how toxic personalities think. You will learn why their behavior works on most people. And most importantly, you will learn the strategies that make their tactics completely ineffective. Because the moment you understand the patterns behind toxic behavior, something remarkable happens. Their manipulation stops feeling confusing. Their criticism stops feeling personal. And the power they once seemed to have over your emotions begins to disappear. Once you see the system, you are no longer trapped inside it. Before we begin, if you're done waiting for motivation to find you, hit like. Not for me, for you. And subscribe only if you're serious about building the version you keep talking about. Chapter 1. The Hidden Cost of Toxic People. Let us begin with a reality that many people underestimate until it has already damaged years of their life. The most dangerous obstacles to your success are rarely dramatic. They do not arrive like obvious enemies announcing their intentions. Instead, they arrive quietly, disguised as normal relationships, ordinary interactions, or routine professional dynamics. Toxic people rarely destroy your life in a single moment. They do it gradually. A manipulative comment here. A subtle criticism there. A small act of disrespect that you try to ignore. Individually, each interaction may seem insignificant, but over time these moments accumulate into something far more destructive than most people realize. Your attention begins to shift. Instead of focusing on building, learning, and improving, your mind becomes occupied with analysis. You replay conversations. You question whether you overreacted. You wonder why someone behaved the way they did. You mentally rehearse what you should have said. This process consumes mental energy that should be invested elsewhere. Modern psychology refers to this as cognitive load. Your brain has a limited capacity for focus, problem-solving, and creativity. Every emotionally draining interaction reduces the amount of mental energy available for meaningful progress. And toxic people are experts at increasing that cognitive load. They create confusion where clarity should exist. They generate emotional tension where collaboration should occur. They introduce unnecessary conflict into environments that should support productivity and growth. The damage becomes even more significant when these interactions occur repeatedly. Research from organizational psychology has demonstrated that a single toxic individual in a workplace can dramatically reduce the productivity of everyone around them. Not simply because they perform poorly, but because they create psychological friction within the environment. People become distracted, they feel anxious, They spend more time managing interpersonal conflict than performing their actual work. But productivity loss is only part of the problem. The deeper damage is psychological. When you are repeatedly exposed to toxic behavior, your nervous system begins to interpret that environment as threatening. Your brain releases stress hormones like cortisol, preparing your body for conflict or danger. In short bursts, this response can be useful. But when it becomes constant, the effects are destructive. Chronic exposure to toxic interactions reduces cognitive flexibility. Your ability to think creatively declines. Your patience shortens. Decision-making becomes reactive rather than strategic. In other words, the presence of toxic individuals slowly reshapes how your mind operates. Think about the last time you dealt with someone who was emotionally manipulative, passive-aggressive, or constantly critical. What happened after that interaction ended? For most people, the conversation does not truly end. It continues in their mind. They replay it while driving home. They revisit it while lying in bed. They imagine different responses they wish they had given. Hours later, the emotional residue remains. That lingering mental replay is not harmless. It is a silent theft of attention. And attention is the most valuable asset you possess. Your goals require concentration. Your ambitions require clarity. Your future depends on the ability to direct your energy toward productive outcomes. When toxic people constantly occupy your thoughts, they effectively redirect your energy away from the things that matter most. This is why many talented individuals struggle to reach their potential, even though they possess the intelligence and work ethic required for success. Their environment is draining them. Instead of operating in an environment that amplifies their strengths, they are surrounded by individuals who quietly weaken their focus and confidence. Unfortunately, most people respond to toxic behavior in ways that unintentionally make the situation worse. There are 4 extremely common responses that trap people in these dynamics. The first response is appeasement. Many individuals believe that if they remain patient, kind, and accommodating, the toxic person will eventually change. They think that politeness will calm the situation, or that generosity will inspire better behavior. But toxic behavior rarely works that way. Toxic individuals often interpret kindness as weakness. When they realize their actions have no consequences, they simply continue their behavior. The second response is logical persuasion. People assume that if they can clearly explain their perspective, the toxic individual will eventually understand. They present facts. They provide evidence. They attempt to reason through the conflict. This approach fails because toxic individuals are not operating primarily from logic. They are operating from emotional insecurity, control needs, or psychological dysfunction. Logic does not influence someone who is motivated by emotional dominance or attention. The third response is emotional retaliation. After repeated frustration, some people begin responding with anger, sarcasm, or aggression. They attempt to fight toxicity with more toxicity. But this strategy only escalates the conflict and pulls you into the very behavior you are trying to escape. You lose your composure. You become reactive. And the toxic individual gains exactly what they wanted: your emotional engagement. The fourth response is passive avoidance. Some individuals attempt to solve the problem by ignoring it completely. They distance themselves without understanding the dynamics involved. They avoid confrontation, but never develop the skills necessary to manage difficult personalities effectively. While distance can sometimes help, avoidance without understanding leaves you vulnerable to encountering the same patterns again in future relationships. Because toxic people are not rare. They exist in every social structure. They appear in workplaces, families, friendships, and partnerships. Avoiding one individual does not guarantee that another will not appear later. This is why the ability to recognize and strategically respond to toxic individuals is not simply a social skill. It is a life skill. Just as learning to manage finances protects your economic future, learning to manage toxic behavior protects your psychological stability. The individuals who thrive in complex environments are not those who never encounter difficult people. They are the ones who understand how to handle them. They recognize manipulation quickly. They avoid emotional traps. They protect their attention and energy with deliberate boundaries. Most importantly, they refuse to allow toxic individuals to dictate the direction of their life. Because once you understand the hidden cost of toxic people, you begin to see something very clearly. Your success does not depend only on what you build. It also depends on what you refuse to tolerate. Chapter 2. The 7 Archetypes of Toxic Personalities. Not all toxic people behave the same way. One of the biggest mistakes people make when dealing with difficult individuals is assuming that every toxic person operates from the same motives or uses the same tactics. In reality, toxic personalities follow recognizable patterns. Once you understand these patterns, something powerful happens. Confusion disappears. What once felt unpredictable becomes identifiable. And when behavior becomes identifiable, it becomes manageable. Most toxic individuals fall into a small number of behavioral archetypes. These archetypes are not rigid psychological diagnoses. Rather, they are practical patterns of behavior that appear repeatedly across workplaces, friendships, families, and social circles. Recognizing them early allows you to adjust your response before the damage escalates. The first archetype is the energy vampire. Energy vampires are not necessarily aggressive or openly hostile. In fact, they often appear harmless at first. Their defining characteristic is emotional consumption. They constantly talk about problems, frustrations, disappointments, and personal struggles. Conversations with them almost always revolve around negativity. If you observe carefully, you will notice a pattern. They rarely ask meaningful questions about your life. They rarely celebrate positive developments. Instead, they redirect every interaction back to their own difficulties. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. After spending time with them, you feel exhausted. Your motivation decreases. Your mental clarity fades. The reason is simple. Emotional attention is a limited resource. Energy vampires absorb it continuously without replenishing it. The second archetype is the controller. Controllers have an intense need to influence the behavior of others. They feel uncomfortable when they are not directing the situation. This personality type appears in many forms. It may be the micromanaging supervisor who cannot delegate tasks without interfering. It may be the partner who constantly demands updates about your schedule and decisions. It may even be the friend who insists on deciding where everyone goes and what everyone does. The underlying motivation behind controllers is insecurity. Control gives them psychological stability. When others operate independently, they experience anxiety because they feel their influence weakening. As a result, they push boundaries repeatedly until they establish dominance. The third archetype is the narcissist. Narcissistic personalities are among the most difficult toxic individuals to manage because they are often highly intelligent and socially skilled. In the beginning, they can appear extremely charismatic. They compliment you generously. They show intense interest in your life. They create the impression of admiration and connection. This stage is often referred to as love bombing. It serves a purpose: emotional investment. Once they sense that you value the relationship, their behavior begins to change. The compliments fade, Criticism appears. They begin to position themselves as superior while subtly undermining your confidence. Narcissists crave admiration and validation. They view relationships not as partnerships, but as systems for maintaining their self-image. The fourth archetype is the passive-aggressive sabotager. Unlike openly hostile individuals, passive-aggressive people operate indirectly. They rarely confront issues directly. Instead, they undermine others through subtle actions. They might agree to assist you with a task and then fail to follow through. They might make sarcastic comments disguised as humor. They may spread small pieces of damaging information while maintaining plausible innocence. This behavior creates confusion. You sense hostility, but it is difficult to prove. That uncertainty forces you into a constant state of caution, which is exactly what passive-aggressive personalities rely on. The fifth archetype is the emotional manipulator. Emotional manipulators understand human empathy extremely well, and they weaponize it. Their primary tactic is guilt. They use statements that place responsibility for their feelings onto others. They may say things like, "If you cared about me, you would do this," or "After everything I've done for you." These phrases are designed to bypass rational decision-making and activate emotional obligation. Many compassionate individuals fall into this trap because they genuinely care about others' feelings. But the manipulator's objective is not mutual care. It is influence. The sixth archetype is the chronic victim. Chronic victims position themselves as permanently wronged by life. Nothing that goes wrong is ever their responsibility. Every failure becomes someone else's fault. Every disappointment becomes evidence of unfair treatment. At first, these individuals may attract sympathy, but over time, a clear pattern emerges. They never change their behavior. They never accept accountability. Instead, they repeatedly create situations that reinforce their narrative of victimhood. Chronic victims are dangerous because they pull others into endless cycles of rescue and disappointment. The seventh archetype is the boundary violator. Boundary violators operate as if social limits do not apply to them. They ask intrusive questions, share information that should remain private, or appear unexpectedly without considering your time or comfort. When confronted, they often pretend that their actions were simply expressions of friendliness or concern. But their real behavior pattern is consistent. They test limits repeatedly. If those limits are not enforced clearly, their intrusions escalate. Understanding these 7 archetypes changes how you interpret human behavior. Instead of wondering why someone acts the way they do, you begin recognizing patterns. You notice when conversations consistently revolve around negativity. You recognize when admiration suddenly transforms into criticism. You observe when indirect sabotage replaces direct communication. This awareness provides a crucial advantage, because toxic behavior becomes most dangerous when it remains unrecognized. Once you see the pattern, the psychological fog disappears. Instead of reacting emotionally, you begin evaluating interactions strategically. And that strategic awareness is the first step toward protecting your time, your focus, and your future. Chapter 3. The psychology behind toxic behavior. To deal with toxic people effectively, you must understand something fundamental. Toxic behavior is rarely random. It may appear chaotic on the surface. The reactions may seem irrational. The emotional swings may feel unpredictable. But underneath that appearance of disorder, there is almost always a psychological pattern. Toxic behavior serves a function. It helps the person maintain control, protect their ego, gain attention, or regulate emotional insecurity. When you understand this principle, your entire perspective changes. Instead of asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" you begin asking a more strategic question. What psychological need is this behavior serving for them? This shift removes a powerful emotional trap, because the moment you stop interpreting toxic behavior as a personal attack, you gain the ability to observe it objectively. At the core of most toxic personalities lies a deep internal instability. Many toxic individuals struggle with what psychologists call emotional dysregulation. This means they have difficulty managing their own emotions in a healthy way. Instead of processing frustration, insecurity, or fear internally, they project those emotions outward onto other people. Projection is one of the most common mechanisms behind toxic behavior. A person who feels insecure may criticize others constantly. A person who feels powerless may attempt to control everyone around them. A person who feels inadequate may attempt to undermine the achievements of others. In each case, the external behavior is simply a defense mechanism protecting a fragile internal state. Many toxic individuals also developed dysfunctional relationship models early in life. Childhood environments filled with instability, neglect, or excessive criticism often teach individuals unhealthy strategies for gaining attention or influence. For example, a child who only received attention when they created drama may learn that emotional chaos is the most reliable way to gain recognition. A child who experienced unpredictable authority may learn that controlling others is the only way to feel safe. These patterns do not disappear automatically in adulthood. Instead, they evolve into manipulation, emotional volatility, and relational instability. But there is an important principle you must understand. Understanding the origins of toxic behavior does not mean you are responsible for fixing it. This is where many empathetic individuals become trapped. They recognize that the toxic person is acting from pain, insecurity, or past trauma. Their instinct is compassion. They believe that if they provide enough patience, support, or understanding, they can help the person heal. Unfortunately, this belief is often dangerous, because toxic behavior frequently persists precisely because others continue tolerating it. The truth is that people rarely change simply because someone else cares enough. Meaningful change usually occurs only when the cost of maintaining destructive behavior becomes greater than the comfort of continuing it. Without consequences, toxic behavior remains effective. There is another psychological dynamic that many people overlook. Toxic individuals are often drawn toward capable, ambitious, and emotionally intelligent people. At first, this seems counterintuitive. Why would toxic personalities target individuals who appear confident and successful? The answer lies in psychological contrast. When someone with deep internal insecurity encounters a person who displays confidence, stability, or achievement, that contrast creates emotional tension. The toxic individual may feel inferior or threatened by comparison. To reduce that discomfort, they attempt one of two strategies. They either attempt to attach themselves to the successful person in order to benefit from their resources, connections, or energy, or they attempt to diminish that person through criticism, manipulation, or sabotage. Both strategies serve the same purpose: restoring the toxic person's psychological balance. Successful individuals also tend to possess traits that unintentionally make them attractive targets. They are often optimistic. They assume good intentions. They believe problems can be solved through communication and cooperation. While these traits are powerful in healthy environments, they can become vulnerabilities when dealing with manipulative personalities. Toxic individuals recognize this quickly. They sense empathy. They sense patience. They sense the desire to maintain harmony. And they exploit it. Another psychological principle that protects toxic behavior is something known as the fundamental attribution error. Human beings naturally interpret their own negative behavior as the result of circumstances while interpreting others' behavior as the result of character. But empathetic individuals often reverse this pattern. When someone treats them badly, they search for external explanations. They assume the person must be stressed, overwhelmed, or misunderstood. They give repeated chances because they believe the behavior is temporary. Toxic individuals depend on this assumption because every additional chance extends their influence. But here is the critical realization that changes everything. Toxic people do not behave destructively because they lack awareness. They behave destructively because the behavior works. Manipulation produces attention. Guilt produces compliance. Drama produces emotional engagement. As long as these behaviors generate the outcomes they desire, there is no internal incentive to change. This insight can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people want to believe that destructive behavior is simply the result of misunderstanding. But in many cases, the behavior continues precisely because it is effective. And this leads to the most empowering realization of all. If toxic behavior is reinforced by the responses it receives, then changing your response changes the entire dynamic. When you stop rewarding manipulation with attention, it weakens. When you stop responding emotionally to provocation, it loses power. When you stop accepting guilt that does not belong to you, the manipulator loses influence. In other words, the psychology of toxic behavior reveals something extremely important. Your reaction is part of the system. When you change the system, the behavior can no longer function the same way. That is why understanding the psychology behind toxic behavior is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a strategic advantage, because the moment you see toxic behavior as a predictable psychological pattern instead of a personal attack, you regain something that many people lose without realizing it: control over your own response. And control over your response is the first step toward reclaiming control over your life. Chapter 4. The 4 deadly mistakes that keep you trapped in toxic cycles. Most people who struggle with toxic individuals are not weak. They are not naive. They are not unintelligent. In fact, many of the people who become trapped in toxic dynamics are thoughtful, empathetic, capable individuals who genuinely try to treat others well. The problem is not their character. The problem is their strategy. There are 4 extremely common mistakes that keep people locked inside destructive relationships with toxic individuals. These mistakes are so widespread that they often feel natural. Society even encourages them in the name of kindness, patience, or loyalty. But when applied to toxic personalities, these instincts become liabilities. The first mistake is what we can call the empathy trap. Empathy is one of the most valuable human qualities. It allows people to connect, understand each other's struggles, and build meaningful relationships. But toxic individuals know how to manipulate empathy. When confronted about their behavior, they often present emotional explanations that trigger sympathy. They describe past hardships. They express regret. They promise to change. They may even appear genuinely remorseful. Empathetic people respond to these signals by softening their boundaries. They assume the behavior was temporary. They convince themselves that with enough patience, the situation will improve. But toxic individuals often use empathy strategically. They understand that emotional vulnerability disarms criticism. By presenting themselves as wounded or misunderstood, they shift attention away from their behavior and toward their suffering. The result is predictable. Instead of facing consequences, they receive more patience. and patience without boundaries simply extends the cycle. The second mistake is the logic fallacy. Rational people tend to believe that conflicts can be solved through clear communication. They assume that if they explain their perspective carefully enough, the other person will eventually understand. So they try to reason, they present evidence, they clarify misunderstandings, they describe how certain behaviors affect them emotionally. They attempt to reach mutual understanding through discussion. Unfortunately, this approach rarely works with toxic individuals, because toxic behavior is rarely driven by misunderstanding. It is driven by motivation. A manipulative person does not argue because they are confused. They argue because argument itself serves their objective. It keeps the conversation going. It keeps the emotional engagement alive. It keeps your attention focused on them. Every time you attempt to win a logical debate with someone who is not seeking truth, you are playing a game designed for you to lose. The third mistake is reaction addiction. Toxic individuals are experts at provoking emotional responses. They know which comments will trigger frustration. They know which accusations will spark anger. They know how to introduce subtle insults that linger in the mind. When you react emotionally, something important happens. Your attention shifts away from your goals and toward them. You start thinking about what they said. You plan responses. You imagine future confrontations. You begin anticipating their next move. Gradually, they occupy more and more mental space. This is exactly what many toxic individuals want. Attention is a form of power. Emotional reactions confirm their influence. Even negative reactions reinforce the dynamic because they demonstrate that they can still control your focus. In this way, reaction becomes a kind of addiction. You feel compelled to respond, defend yourself, or correct the situation. But every response deepens the engagement. The fourth mistake is perhaps the most dangerous: the savior complex. Many capable individuals believe that they can help toxic people change. They see the potential behind the destructive behavior. They imagine that if they provide enough understanding, guidance, or support, the toxic individual will eventually become healthier. They believe they can be the exception. They believe they can reach the person in a way others could not. This belief can keep people trapped in unhealthy dynamics for years, because the savior complex reframes abuse as a challenge to overcome rather than a signal to disengage. Every disappointment becomes another opportunity to try harder. But real personal change does not occur because someone else sacrifices themselves enough. People change when they make the decision to change. And that decision usually happens only when destructive behavior begins producing consequences that can no longer be ignored. Without consequences, the motivation to change remains extremely low. When you combine these four mistakes, the empathy trap, the logic fallacy, reaction addiction, and the savior complex, you create the perfect environment for toxic behavior to thrive. Your empathy prevents firm boundaries. Your reasoning invites endless debate. Your reactions provide emotional fuel. Your desire to help keeps you invested even when the relationship becomes destructive. Breaking this cycle requires a fundamental shift in thinking. Instead of asking how you can fix the relationship, you begin asking how you can protect your energy. Instead of trying to change the other person, you focus on changing your response. Instead of reacting emotionally, you observe behavior strategically. This shift does not require cruelty or hostility. It requires clarity, because once you recognize the patterns that keep toxic dynamics alive, you begin to see something important. You are not powerless in these situations, but the power you possess does not come from controlling others. It comes from controlling how you participate in the interaction. And that realization leads directly to the most important transformation in dealing with toxic individuals. A transformation of mindset. Chapter 5. The strategic mindset. Shift that changes everything. Everything begins to change the moment you stop asking one question and start asking another. Most people dealing with toxic individuals ask the wrong question. They ask, "How do I make this person stop behaving this way?" They search for the right explanation, the right argument, the right emotional appeal. They believe that somewhere there must be a perfect combination of words that will finally cause the toxic person to understand. But this question gives away your power, because it assumes that your peace of mind depends on someone else changing their behavior. That assumption places you in a permanently vulnerable position. The strategic mindset begins when you replace that question with a different one. How do I protect myself from this person's behavior? This shift may seem subtle, but psychologically it is enormous. Instead of focusing on changing someone else, you focus on controlling what is actually within your influence: your response, your boundaries, and your level of engagement. And when you shift your focus in this way, you immediately gain leverage, because toxic behavior only works when it receives certain responses. It thrives on emotional reactions. It thrives on endless explanations. It thrives on sympathy without consequences. Remove those responses, and the dynamic begins to weaken. This is the essence of strategic thinking in relationships. Rather than treating every interaction as a moral or emotional situation, you begin seeing it as a system of incentives. Every behavior that continues is being rewarded in some way. If someone repeatedly manipulates others through guilt, it is because guilt produces compliance. If someone constantly provokes emotional reactions, it is because emotional reactions provide attention. In other words, toxic behavior persists because it works. The strategic mindset disrupts this system. Instead of rewarding destructive behavior with attention, you remove attention. Instead of responding emotionally, you respond neutrally. Instead of negotiating with manipulation, you establish boundaries that cannot be negotiated. This does not require hostility. It requires discipline. One of the most important elements of this mindset is recognizing that your attention is a limited resource. Most people treat attention as if it were infinite. They respond to every message, every criticism, every provocation. They feel obligated to explain themselves to anyone who demands an explanation. But attention functions much like financial capital. If you invest it wisely, it produces growth. If you waste it on unproductive activities, it disappears without generating meaningful returns. Every moment spent arguing with someone who has no intention of understanding you is an investment that produces no return. Every hour spent analyzing a manipulative interaction is an hour that could have been spent developing skills, building relationships, or pursuing meaningful goals. Successful individuals understand this principle instinctively. They guard their attention carefully. They do not allow every conflict to become their problem. They do not feel obligated to respond to every criticism. They recognize that many arguments are distractions disguised as conversations. This perspective introduces another important concept: relationship return on investment. Every relationship in your life requires some investment of time, energy, and emotional attention. Healthy relationships provide returns on that investment. They offer support, encouragement, cooperation, and shared growth. Toxic relationships function differently. They require continuous investment while providing little or no return. Instead of energizing you, they exhaust you. Instead of supporting your progress, they distract from it. The strategic mindset encourages you to evaluate relationships honestly. not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of clarity. Ask yourself simple questions. Do interactions with this person leave me more energized or more drained? Do they support my goals or create obstacles? Do they respect my boundaries or test them repeatedly? These questions reveal patterns that emotion often hides. Another important shift involves releasing unnecessary guilt. Many people feel uncomfortable when they begin establishing firm boundaries. They worry about appearing selfish, insensitive, or cold. They fear that protecting their own well-being might harm others. But kindness and self-sacrifice are not the same thing. You can care about people without allowing them unlimited access to your energy. You can show compassion without accepting manipulation. You can wish someone well without allowing them to repeatedly disrupt your life. In fact, clear boundaries often create healthier dynamics than endless tolerance. When people understand that certain behaviors produce immediate consequences, they adjust. And if they do not adjust, the boundaries protect you from further damage. Another powerful benefit of the strategic mindset is emotional detachment. This does not mean becoming indifferent or uncaring. It means recognizing that someone else's behavior is not always a reflection of your worth. When toxic individuals criticize you, manipulate you, or attempt to provoke you, they are often revealing more about their internal state than about your character. Their actions reflect their insecurities, their frustrations, and their unresolved conflicts. Understanding this allows you to observe their behavior without absorbing its emotional impact. Imagine encountering a storm. You do not take the storm personally. You do not feel insulted by the rain or angry at the wind. You simply recognize the environment and adjust your behavior accordingly. The strategic mindset approaches toxic behavior in a similar way. Instead of reacting emotionally, you evaluate the situation objectively. You determine the most effective response based on your goals and priorities. Sometimes that response involves establishing boundaries. Sometimes it involves reducing interaction. Sometimes it involves leaving the environment entirely. But the decision is guided by strategy rather than emotion. Once you adopt this perspective, something remarkable happens. Interactions that once felt overwhelming begin to feel predictable. You recognize patterns sooner. You anticipate manipulation earlier. You respond with clarity rather than confusion. And when toxic individuals realize that their usual tactics no longer produce the desired reaction, many of them eventually move on in search of easier targets, because manipulation thrives on vulnerability. Remove the vulnerability, and the manipulation loses its power. This mindset shift is the foundation for everything that follows. Once you stop trying to control others and begin mastering your own responses, you move from a position of reaction to a position of strategy. And strategy is the difference between being trapped by toxic dynamics and rising above them. Chapter 6. The Tactical Response System for Each Type of Toxic Person. Understanding toxic behavior is powerful, but understanding alone is not enough. Awareness must be paired with action. Once you recognize toxic patterns, the next step is learning how to respond in ways that protect your energy while preventing manipulation from continuing. This requires tactics, and those tactics must match the specific type of toxic behavior you are dealing with. A single universal strategy rarely works. Different toxic personalities pursue different psychological rewards. Some want attention, some want control. Others want admiration or emotional leverage. The key is recognizing what they seek and removing access to it. Let us begin with the energy vampire. Energy vampires thrive on emotional engagement. Their stories are dramatic. Their problems are endless. They present every inconvenience as a crisis. Conversations with them often stretch far longer than necessary because they continually introduce new frustrations or disappointments. The goal of an energy vampire is simple: attention. The most effective response strategy is often called the gray rock method. Imagine becoming as emotionally uninteresting as a plain gray stone. Your responses are brief, neutral, unemotional. You acknowledge what they say without encouraging the conversation to expand. Instead of asking questions or offering extensive sympathy, you provide short statements such as, "That sounds difficult," or "I hope that works out." Then you redirect the conversation or end it. Without emotional reinforcement, the interaction becomes unsatisfying for the energy vampire. Over time, they often redirect their attention toward individuals who provide stronger reactions. Next is the controller. Controllers attempt to influence decisions, behaviors, and routines. They test limits repeatedly to see how much authority they can establish. If they detect hesitation or uncertainty, they interpret it as an invitation to increase their influence. With controllers, the most important tactic is clear, consistent boundaries. Your responses should be calm but firm. You state your position without extended justification. For example, if a controlling colleague tries to micromanage your work, you might respond with something like, "I appreciate the input. I'll provide an update during our scheduled review." You do not debate the boundary. You simply maintain it. Controllers respect consistency. When they realize that pushing your boundaries produces no change, they eventually reduce the pressure or shift their focus elsewhere. Then we encounter the narcissist. Narcissistic personalities operate on admiration. They seek constant validation and often exaggerate their achievements. At the same time, they may subtly criticize others to maintain their sense of superiority. Responding emotionally, whether with praise or confrontation, often strengthens the narcissist's engagement. Praise feeds their ego. Direct criticism invites extended argument. The most effective tactic is strategic indifference. You remain polite and respectful, but you do not provide the admiration they crave. When they boast about an accomplishment, you respond neutrally rather than enthusiastically. When they attempt to provoke comparison or competition, you decline to participate. Without the emotional validation they expect, the narcissist eventually becomes less invested in maintaining the interaction. Now consider the passive-aggressive sabotager. These individuals rarely attack directly. Instead, they undermine progress through subtle behaviors, delayed responses, forgotten commitments, sarcastic remarks disguised as humor. The most effective response is direct clarity. Passive-aggressive individuals depend on ambiguity. When their actions are made visible, their tactics lose effectiveness. If someone repeatedly fails to follow through on responsibilities, address the pattern clearly and calmly. Focus on observable behavior rather than emotional accusation. For example, "This task has been delayed several times. Going forward, I'll need written confirmation when it's completed." By shifting the conversation toward accountability, you remove the protective cover of ambiguity. Next is the emotional manipulator. These individuals attempt to influence decisions by triggering guilt, obligation, or fear. They often frame requests in emotionally loaded language that implies your refusal would demonstrate selfishness or lack of care. The key strategy here is separating emotion from decision-making. You acknowledge their feelings without accepting responsibility for managing them. For example, if someone says, "If you cared about me, you would help with this," a strategic response might be, "I understand that this is important to you, but I'm not able to do that." Notice what happens here. The emotional appeal is acknowledged, but the decision remains unchanged. This prevents manipulation from achieving its intended outcome. Now consider the chronic victim. Chronic victims present themselves as endlessly wronged by circumstances. They describe a continuous series of setbacks while rarely taking responsibility for their role in creating those situations. The instinctive response is to rescue them, to offer solutions, resources, or emotional reassurance. But repeated rescue only reinforces the pattern. A more effective strategy is redirecting responsibility. When they present a problem, express empathy, but encourage them to consider their own solutions. You might respond with, "That sounds frustrating. What do you think would help improve the situation?" This subtle shift returns responsibility to where it belongs. Finally, we encounter the boundary violator. Boundary violators test limits repeatedly. They may ask intrusive questions, demand your time unexpectedly, or share personal information without permission. The only effective strategy with boundary violators is immediate consequence. When a boundary is crossed, address it directly and calmly. Do not delay. Do not soften the message with excessive explanation. Simply state the limit and enforce it through action. For example, if someone continues contacting you outside agreed hours, you stop responding during those times. If someone appears without notice, you decline the visit. Consistency is critical here. Toxic individuals often respond to new boundaries with what psychologists call an extinction burst. When a previously successful tactic stops working, they temporarily increase their efforts. They push harder, argue more intensely, or attempt additional manipulation. This escalation is not a sign that your strategy is failing. It is often a sign that it is beginning to work. If you remain consistent, the behavior eventually decreases because it no longer produces results. Across all these tactics, one principle remains constant. Your response determines the outcome. Toxic behavior survives through emotional engagement, unclear boundaries, and repeated second chances. Remove those conditions, and the entire dynamic begins to change. You do not need to become aggressive or confrontational to protect yourself. You simply need to become deliberate. Because once your responses become consistent and strategic, toxic individuals quickly realize something they dislike very much. Their usual tactics no longer work. Chapter 7. The Art of Unbreakable Boundaries. If there is one skill that separates people who remain trapped in toxic relationships from those who remain protected, it is the ability to establish and enforce boundaries. Many people believe they understand what boundaries are. They say things like, "I need to set better boundaries," or "I wish people respected my limits more." But when you look closely at how boundaries are actually implemented, something important becomes clear. Most people are not setting boundaries. They are making requests, and requests can easily be ignored. A request depends on the cooperation of the other person. A boundary does not. A true boundary is not something someone else must agree to. It is a limit you establish for your own behavior, and it remains in place regardless of how the other person reacts. This distinction changes everything. For example, many people say something like, "Please don't call me late at night." That sounds like a boundary, but in reality, it is a request. The other person can choose whether or not to respect it. A real boundary sounds different. It might sound like this: "I don't answer calls after 9 p.m. Notice the difference. The statement does not attempt to control the other person's behavior. It simply clarifies what you will do if the situation occurs. That shift places control back where it belongs, with you. Another common mistake people make when establishing boundaries is believing that the other person must understand or agree with the boundary before it becomes valid. They feel compelled to provide detailed explanations or justifications. But excessive explanation often weakens boundaries. When you explain your reasoning at length, toxic individuals often treat the explanation as an invitation for negotiation. They analyze your reasons. They search for exceptions. They attempt to persuade you that your boundary is unnecessary or unreasonable. Strong boundaries do not require long explanations. They require clarity and consistency. A simple statement such as, "I'm not comfortable with that," or "that doesn't work for me," is often sufficient. When repeated calmly and consistently, these statements establish limits that become increasingly difficult to challenge. However, clarity alone is not enough. A boundary without consequences is not a boundary. It is a suggestion. If someone repeatedly violates your stated limits and nothing happens, they quickly learn that the boundary has no real meaning. Over time, their behavior often becomes even more intrusive because they now understand that persistence produces results. Consequences do not need to be dramatic or hostile. They simply need to be consistent. If someone repeatedly interrupts your work with unnecessary conversations, the consequence might be ending the interaction quickly and returning to your task. If someone continues bringing up topics you have asked them to avoid, the consequence might be ending the conversation entirely. The key is that the consequence happens immediately. Delayed responses weaken boundaries. Immediate responses reinforce them. Another important concept is understanding that boundary testing is normal. When you begin establishing stronger boundaries, toxic individuals often respond with increased pressure. They may argue more intensely, attempt emotional appeals, or accuse you of being unreasonable. Psychologists refer to this reaction as an extinction burst. When a behavior that once produced results stops working, individuals often increase the intensity of that behavior temporarily in an attempt to restore the previous outcome. Imagine someone repeatedly pressing a button that used to produce a reward. If the reward suddenly disappears, they will often press the button more frequently before eventually giving up. The same principle applies to toxic interactions. If manipulation or pressure once worked on you, the person may initially increase their efforts when you begin enforcing boundaries. This temporary escalation is not a failure of your strategy. It is a predictable stage in the process of changing the dynamic. Consistency during this stage is essential. If you maintain the boundary without reacting emotionally or backing down, the behavior eventually loses effectiveness. There is another aspect of boundary enforcement that becomes particularly important in professional environments: documentation. When dealing with boundary violations at work, maintaining records can protect you from misunderstandings or manipulation. Keeping notes about repeated behaviors, missed commitments, or inappropriate communication creates clarity if the situation escalates. Documentation also provides psychological reassurance. It reminds you that your perception of events is accurate, especially in situations where someone may attempt to rewrite history or deny previous actions. But boundaries are not only about protecting yourself from others, they are also about protecting your own time and energy. Many people struggle with boundaries because they feel guilty about disappointing others. They believe that saying no will damage relationships or create unnecessary conflict. However, relationships that depend on the absence of boundaries are rarely healthy relationships. Healthy relationships respect limits. In fact, boundaries often improve relationships because they create predictability and mutual respect. When people understand what behaviors are acceptable and what behaviors are not, interactions become clearer and less stressful. Finally, it is important to remember that boundaries may evolve over time. As you gain more experience recognizing toxic behavior, you may adjust your limits to reflect new insights. What once seemed acceptable may later appear unnecessary or harmful. This adjustment is not inconsistency, it is growth. The most successful individuals treat boundaries not as rigid walls, but as intelligent systems designed to protect their attention, their energy, and their priorities. They understand that their time and focus are valuable resources. They refuse to allow those resources to be consumed by behavior that repeatedly disrupts their progress. When you master the art of unbreakable boundaries, something interesting begins to happen. Many toxic interactions disappear naturally, not because the toxic individuals suddenly change, but because they recognize that their usual tactics no longer produce results. And when manipulation stops producing results, manipulators often look elsewhere for easier opportunities, which leaves you with something far more valuable: your peace of mind. Chapter 8. Emotional Protection. Protocols and mental armor setting boundaries protects your external environment. But dealing with toxic people also requires something equally important: internal protection. Many people succeed at limiting contact with toxic individuals, yet they still suffer emotionally long after the interaction ends. A single conversation can remain in their thoughts for hours or even days. The toxic person's words echo in their mind. Doubt appears. Frustration builds. Energy drains. This is where internal protection becomes critical. Toxic individuals do not only influence your external circumstances, they attempt to infiltrate your mental space. Their goal is not always to win an argument or gain control in the moment. Often, their deeper influence occurs after the interaction ends, when your mind continues replaying the event. Emotional protection prevents this. The first internal defense is mental compartmentalization. Mental compartmentalization is the ability to separate someone else's behavior from your own identity and self-worth. Many people unconsciously merge the two. When someone criticizes them unfairly, they begin questioning their own abilities. When someone expresses anger, they feel responsible for fixing the emotional tension. But healthy psychological boundaries operate differently. When toxic individuals behave destructively, you categorize the behavior as information about them rather than information about yourself. Their criticism becomes a reflection of their emotional state, not an objective evaluation of your value. This separation allows you to observe toxic behavior without absorbing its emotional weight. The second defense is developing an internal locus of control. An internal locus of control means that your sense of stability and self-worth comes from within rather than from external validation. When someone with a strong internal center receives criticism, they evaluate it calmly. If the feedback contains useful information, they apply it. If it is unfair or manipulative, they discard it. Their emotional state remains stable because it is not dependent on external approval. This stability makes toxic individuals far less effective. Manipulation relies on emotional dependence. When someone can no longer control your emotional reactions, their influence weakens dramatically. The third protection strategy is emotional buffering. Toxic individuals often attempt to transfer their emotional state onto others. When they feel frustrated, they attempt to create frustration. When they feel anxious, they attempt to spread anxiety. When they feel anger, they attempt to provoke anger in return. Emotional buffering interrupts this transfer. You acknowledge the emotional atmosphere without allowing it to enter your own mental state. If someone speaks with hostility, you recognize the hostility but do not mirror it. If someone attempts to create urgency or panic, you slow the conversation down instead of accelerating it. One practical way to strengthen emotional buffering is through visualization. Before interacting with someone you know may behave manipulatively, Imagine a protective barrier around your mind. Visualize their negative words striking that barrier and losing their impact. The words exist, but they do not penetrate your emotional core. Visualization may seem simple, but it is used widely in fields such as sports psychology and performance training. The mind responds strongly to mental imagery, and repeated practice strengthens emotional resilience. Another critical skill is strategic emotional detachment. Detachment does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means recognizing that not every relationship deserves equal emotional investment. Many people unconsciously invest enormous emotional energy into individuals who repeatedly harm them. Strategic detachment allows you to reduce that investment. You can still treat people with courtesy and respect while maintaining distance from their emotional fluctuations. You no longer feel responsible for solving their problems, stabilizing their moods, or repairing conflicts they create. This shift dramatically reduces the psychological impact of toxic interactions. The next protection technique is cognitive reframing. Cognitive reframing involves changing the way you interpret behavior. When toxic individuals criticize or provoke you, your first instinct might be to interpret their actions as personal attacks. This interpretation triggers emotional reactions. Reframing replaces that interpretation with a more strategic one. Instead of thinking, "Why are they treating me this way?" you begin thinking, "What does this behavior reveal about their mindset?" This perspective transforms the interaction into a source of information rather than a source of emotional disturbance. For example, someone who constantly belittles others often reveals insecurity rather than authority. Someone who repeatedly creates drama may be seeking attention rather than resolution. When viewed through this lens, the behavior becomes easier to manage because it no longer defines your self-perception. Another essential defense is energy management. Toxic interactions drain emotional energy, and ignoring this drain can lead to burnout. Many people underestimate how important recovery is after difficult interactions. Energy restoration must be intentional. Physical activity can reset emotional tension. Time spent in calm environments restores cognitive clarity. Positive interactions with supportive individuals help counterbalance negative experiences. The key is recognizing early warning signs of emotional depletion. Irritability, fatigue, and difficulty concentrating often signal that your mental resources need restoration. Finally, there is a powerful practice called psychological documentation. Psychological documentation means mentally or physically recording patterns of toxic behavior. When someone repeatedly manipulates or gaslights others, these records help you maintain perspective. Gaslighting works by making you doubt your memory or interpretation of events. But when you clearly remember or document past interactions, the attempt loses effectiveness. Patterns become visible. You notice how certain individuals repeat the same tactics. You begin predicting their behavior before it occurs. Instead of feeling surprised or confused, you remain prepared. Together, these internal defenses create what can be called psychological immunity. Just as the human body develops immunity to biological threats, the mind can develop resilience to emotional threats. Each time you practice these techniques, your psychological immunity strengthens. Toxic individuals may still attempt manipulation, criticism, or emotional pressure, but their actions lose the power they once had. Because once your internal defenses are strong, the external environment no longer controls your mental state. And when your mind remains protected, your focus returns to what matters most: building the life you want to create. Chapter 9. Advanced communication strategies that neutralize toxic behavior. Communication with healthy people is usually based on mutual understanding, Most conversations follow a simple assumption. Both individuals want clarity, cooperation, and progress. But communication with toxic individuals operates under a completely different set of rules. Many of the techniques that work well in normal conversations, such as open vulnerability, extended explanations, or emotional transparency, can become weaknesses when used with manipulative personalities. Toxic individuals often treat communication as a strategic game. The objective is not clarity. The objective is control, attention, or emotional influence. This means your communication style must change. The first advanced strategy is strategic non-engagement. Not every conversation deserves your participation. Toxic individuals frequently initiate discussions that have no possible productive outcome. They bring up old conflicts that cannot be resolved. They repeat arguments that have already been settled. They attempt to provoke emotional reactions by questioning your motives or character. These conversations are not meant to solve problems. They are meant to consume your attention. Strategic non-engagement means recognizing these traps early and refusing to participate. Instead of debating endlessly, you calmly state that the conversation is not productive and remove yourself from the situation. This response often feels uncomfortable at first, because many people are conditioned to believe they must defend themselves or resolve every disagreement. But silence and disengagement often neutralize manipulation more effectively than explanation. The second strategy is the information diet. Information is power. Toxic individuals understand this extremely well. When you share personal insecurities, goals, or frustrations with someone who is manipulative, that information may later be used against you. They may reference your vulnerabilities during arguments. They may distort your words in conversations with others. The information diet involves carefully limiting what personal information you share. This does not require dishonesty or secrecy. It simply means keeping conversations focused on neutral topics rather than deeply personal matters. You share what is necessary for the relationship to function, but you protect sensitive details that could be used as leverage. The third strategy is emotional validation without agreement. Toxic individuals often frame their arguments around emotions. They may say things such as, "You made me angry," or "You hurt my feelings." Many people assume that acknowledging those emotions means accepting blame. But there is a middle path. You can acknowledge someone's emotional state without accepting their interpretation of the situation. For example, you might say, "I understand that you're frustrated," rather than arguing about whether their frustration is justified. This technique removes emotional escalation from the conversation while avoiding the trap of accepting responsibility for someone else's feelings. The fourth strategy is the broken record technique. Manipulative individuals often rely on persistence. They repeat requests, escalate arguments, or introduce new emotional appeals in an attempt to wear down resistance. The broken record technique prevents this strategy from working. Instead of responding with different explanations each time, you repeat the same calm statement consistently. For example, if someone repeatedly pressures you to change a decision, your response remains the same each time. "I'm not able to do that." No additional explanation. No variation in wording. Over time, the manipulator realizes that persistence will not change the outcome. The fifth strategy is strategic questioning. Rather than defending yourself against accusations or emotional pressure, you ask questions that expose the underlying logic of the situation. For example, if someone attempts to manipulate you with guilt by saying, "If you really cared, you would help me with this." A strategic question might be, "Why do you believe that this is the only way to demonstrate care?" Questions shift the dynamic of the conversation. Instead of reacting emotionally, you encourage reflection. Often, the manipulative argument loses strength when it must be explained logically. The sixth strategy is deflection and redirection. Toxic individuals frequently attempt to assign responsibility for their emotions or problems to others. When this occurs, the instinctive reaction is often to defend yourself. But defending yourself can unintentionally reinforce the accusation. Deflection and redirection involves acknowledging the concern while returning responsibility to the person who raised it. If someone says, "You're making my life difficult," a strategic response might be, "That sounds frustrating. What do you think would improve the situation?" This response avoids conflict while subtly reinforcing personal accountability. The seventh strategy is time limitation. Many manipulative individuals rely on prolonged conversations to exhaust resistance. The longer a discussion continues, the more opportunities they have to introduce emotional pressure or confusing arguments. Time limitation prevents this tactic from working. Before entering a conversation with someone who tends to dominate discussions, establish a clear time boundary. For example, you might say, "I have about 10 minutes to talk." Once the time limit is reached, you end the conversation politely. This boundary preserves your attention and prevents endless debates. The eighth and final strategy is documentation and witnesses. In environments such as workplaces or professional partnerships, toxic individuals may attempt to distort conversations after they occur. They may deny commitments, reinterpret agreements, or present events differently to others. Documentation protects you from this tactic. Following important conversations with written summaries creates clarity. Copying relevant colleagues or supervisors when appropriate introduces transparency. This practice discourages manipulative behavior because it reduces the opportunity for revision of events. Taken together, these communication strategies transform the dynamic of toxic interactions. Instead of reacting emotionally, you communicate deliberately. Instead of becoming trapped in endless arguments, you limit engagement. Instead of providing personal information that can be used against you, you control the flow of information. These techniques do not require confrontation or hostility. They require discipline and awareness. And once these habits become natural, something interesting happens. Many toxic individuals begin avoiding interaction with you altogether, because manipulation depends on emotional engagement. When that engagement disappears, so does the reward they were seeking. Chapter 10. The Strategic Decision Matrix. When to fight, when to stay, when to walk away. One of the most difficult questions people face when dealing with toxic individuals is deceptively simple. Should you continue dealing with them, or should you remove them from your life entirely? Many people approach this decision emotionally. When frustration rises, they feel an impulse to cut ties immediately. When guilt appears, they feel pressure to tolerate behavior that harms them. Both reactions can lead to poor decisions. The truth is that not every toxic relationship should be handled the same way. Some situations require strategic confrontation, others require careful distance, and some require complete disengagement. This is where strategic thinking becomes essential. Instead of reacting emotionally, you evaluate the situation using a structured framework, a decision matrix. This framework considers 4 important factors: the importance of the relationship, your ability to influence the situation, the cost of continued engagement, and the availability of alternatives. The first factor is relationship importance. Not every relationship in your life carries the same weight. Some individuals influence your career, finances, or daily responsibilities, Others exist on the periphery of your life. When evaluating importance, consider the following questions. Does this person have authority over your professional opportunities? Do they affect your financial stability or living environment? Are they deeply connected to other relationships that matter to you? If the answer to these questions is yes, the relationship holds structural importance. This does not mean toxic behavior must be tolerated indefinitely, but it does mean that your response must be strategic rather than impulsive. The second factor is your ability to influence the situation. Some toxic individuals can be managed with clear boundaries and consistent consequences. Others are deeply entrenched in destructive behavior patterns that resist change. Your influence depends on several variables. Do you have authority within the relationship? Do you have allies who support accountability? Does the individual face consequences when their behavior causes problems? If influence is high, strategic intervention may produce improvement. If influence is extremely low, prolonged effort may only exhaust your energy without producing change. The third factor is the cost of continued engagement. Every interaction requires investment. Time, attention, emotional energy, and sometimes financial resources are all involved in maintaining relationships. With toxic individuals, these costs often increase dramatically. You may spend hours recovering emotionally from conversations. You may feel constant tension, anticipating the next interaction. You may adjust your behavior repeatedly in an attempt to prevent conflict. Over time, these costs accumulate. Ask yourself honestly, is the energy required to maintain this relationship preventing progress in other areas of your life? If the answer is yes, the long-term cost may outweigh any potential benefit. The fourth factor is the availability of alternatives. Sometimes toxic individuals remain in our lives because we believe they are necessary. But often this belief is based on outdated assumptions. In professional environments, there may be opportunities to change teams, departments, or even organizations. In social environments, new friendships can develop when space is created for them. In business partnerships, alternative collaborators may exist. Exploring alternatives expands your options. When these four factors are evaluated together, toxic relationships generally fall into one of four categories. The first category is high importance with high influence. In these situations, the relationship significantly affects your goals, and you possess some ability to influence the dynamic. Examples might include a supervisor whose approval affects your career progression, or a business partner whose cooperation determines financial outcomes. In these cases, the strategic choice is often to engage actively. You implement boundaries, you document behavior, you use communication strategies and build alliances when necessary. The objective is not emotional confrontation, but structured change. The second category is high importance with low influence. These situations occur when a relationship cannot easily be avoided, but meaningful influence over the person's behavior is limited. This often happens with certain family members or individuals who occupy unavoidable positions in professional environments. In these cases, the strategic response is controlled coexistence. You minimize unnecessary interaction. You strengthen emotional protection strategies. You maintain firm boundaries while focusing your attention on areas of life where you have greater influence. The third category is low importance with high influence. These relationships may include casual acquaintances, distant colleagues, or social contacts who occasionally behave negatively. Because the relationship does not strongly affect your major goals, you have flexibility. You may choose to address the behavior directly if improvement seems possible. But if the situation becomes inconvenient, reducing contact is usually simple. The final category is low importance with low influence. These are individuals who contribute little value to your life, while consistently creating negative experiences. In these situations, the strategic choice is usually complete disengagement. You remove them from your environment. You decline invitations. You stop investing energy in interactions that offer no meaningful return. This decision is not cruel. It is efficient. Your time and attention are finite resources. Protecting them allows you to invest more energy into relationships and goals that produce positive outcomes. It is important to remember that this decision matrix is not static. Relationships evolve. Circumstances change. Your influence may increase as your experience and authority grow. Conversely, some relationships may become less important as your life moves in new directions. Regular reflection ensures that your decisions remain aligned with your goals. Successful individuals often appear decisive in these situations, but their decisions are rarely impulsive. They simply evaluate relationships through the lens of long-term strategy. They ask a simple question: does this relationship support the direction I want my life to move? If the answer is yes, they invest effort in improving the dynamic. If the answer is no, they reduce or remove the investment. This clarity protects their energy and allows them to focus on the people and opportunities that truly matter. Chapter 11. Mastering workplace toxic politics without destroying your career. The workplace presents one of the most complex environments for dealing with toxic people. In personal life, you often have the option to distance yourself or completely remove someone from your environment. At work, the situation is rarely that simple. Your income, your reputation, and your long-term career trajectory may all depend on your ability to interact with individuals you would never voluntarily choose to spend time with. This is why workplace toxicity requires a different strategy. In professional environments, your goal is not just emotional protection. Your goal is strategic navigation. You must protect your position while preventing toxic individuals from damaging your credibility or limiting your opportunities. The first principle of navigating toxic workplaces is understanding a powerful truth. Perception often matters as much as reality. People rarely see the entire picture of workplace dynamics. Colleagues observe fragments of conversations, pieces of projects, and isolated incidents. Because of this, how others interpret your behavior can strongly influence your professional reputation. This means that even when you are dealing with difficult or manipulative colleagues, your responses must remain calm and professional. Losing your composure may feel justified in the moment, but it often benefits the toxic individual more than it benefits you. Toxic personalities frequently attempt to provoke emotional reactions because those reactions can later be used to portray you as unstable, difficult, or uncooperative. Professional composure is therefore one of your strongest defenses. Another critical practice in workplace environments is strategic documentation. Toxic colleagues sometimes distort events after they occur. They may deny commitments, misrepresent conversations, or shift blame when projects encounter difficulties. Maintaining clear records protects you from these tactics. After important discussions, sending follow-up emails summarizing decisions and responsibilities creates a written record. This habit is simple, but extremely powerful. It ensures that expectations are clearly documented and reduces opportunities for manipulation. Email communication also introduces transparency. When necessary, copying relevant team members or supervisors on important messages ensures that multiple individuals are aware of project details and responsibilities. This discourages toxic individuals from misrepresenting events because others can see the information directly. However, documentation should always remain professional. Your goal is not to build a case against someone or create unnecessary conflict. Your goal is to create clarity and accountability so that your work and reputation remain protected. Managing a toxic supervisor requires an especially strategic approach because the power dynamic is uneven. Unlike conflicts with peers, direct confrontation with a supervisor can carry serious professional risks. But this does not mean you are powerless. Many toxic supervisors are motivated by a desire for control, recognition, or authority. Understanding these motivations allows you to manage the relationship more effectively. For example, some supervisors expect frequent updates because it reinforces their sense of oversight. Providing structured updates before they request them can reduce unnecessary interference. Similarly, acknowledging their role in successful outcomes can satisfy their need for recognition without compromising your own contributions. This approach does not mean abandoning integrity. It simply means recognizing that professional environments often require careful navigation of personalities. At the same time, it is essential to protect your long-term career options. Develop relationships with other leaders or departments within the organization. Document your accomplishments and contributions so that your work is visible beyond a single supervisor. Expand your skills so that your value remains strong in multiple environments. These actions create leverage. If a toxic supervisor's behavior becomes unbearable, you are not trapped. You have built professional credibility and alternative opportunities. Another important strategy in workplace environments is alliance building. Toxic individuals often rely on isolation to maintain influence. When someone lacks supportive relationships within an organization, they become easier targets for criticism or manipulation. Developing positive relationships with reasonable colleagues reduces this vulnerability. These alliances should be based on professionalism rather than gossip. Complaining about toxic individuals may provide temporary relief, but it rarely strengthens your reputation. Instead, focus on collaboration, reliability, and consistent performance. When respected colleagues recognize your integrity and work quality, their perception becomes a powerful shield against attempts to undermine you. Sometimes, toxic individuals attempt to sabotage projects or damage reputations indirectly. When this occurs, responding emotionally or publicly defending yourself can unintentionally escalate the conflict. A more effective response is often quiet excellence. Continue producing strong results. Deliver consistent performance. Over time, a pattern emerges. People begin to notice who consistently contributes value and who repeatedly creates disruption. Reputation is built gradually, but once established, it becomes a powerful form of protection. Professional boundaries are also essential in workplace environments. Maintaining a respectful distance between professional and personal life prevents toxic individuals from accessing information that could later be used against you. Sharing sensitive personal struggles or frustrations with colleagues can create vulnerability if those colleagues prove untrustworthy. This does not mean becoming distant or unfriendly. It simply means maintaining awareness about what information belongs in professional settings and what should remain private. Finally, remember that careers unfold over many years. A toxic colleague or supervisor may feel overwhelming in the moment, but their influence is often temporary within the larger timeline of your professional life. Sometimes the most strategic decision is patience. You may tolerate a difficult environment temporarily while gaining experience, building skills, or preparing for a better opportunity. The key is making that decision consciously rather than feeling trapped by circumstance. When you approach workplace toxicity with strategy instead of emotion, you maintain control over your career path. Instead of allowing difficult personalities to derail your progress, you learn to navigate around them. And in doing so, You develop a skill that many professionals never fully master: the ability to succeed in complex environments without sacrificing your integrity or your future. Chapter 12. Family Dynamics and Toxic Relatives. You cannot escape family relationships present one of the most emotionally complicated situations when it comes to toxic behavior. In many areas of life, if someone repeatedly harms your peace of mind, the solution can be straightforward. You create distance. You reduce contact. In some cases, you end the relationship completely. Family does not work that way. Family relationships carry years, sometimes decades, of emotional history. Cultural expectations reinforce the belief that family bonds must always be preserved no matter what happens. People are often told that loyalty to family should override personal discomfort or emotional harm. But this belief can trap individuals in destructive patterns. Sharing blood or history with someone does not automatically guarantee that the relationship is healthy. Some family members carry the same toxic traits found in workplaces or social circles: control, manipulation, jealousy, or chronic negativity. The difference is that these dynamics often become normalized over time. Many people grow up adapting to toxic family behavior without realizing it. They develop roles that help the family system function, even if those roles damage their own well-being. One person becomes the peacemaker, always trying to calm conflicts. Another becomes the caretaker, solving everyone else's problems. Someone else may become the scapegoat, blamed whenever tension appears. These roles often continue well into adulthood. Breaking free from these patterns requires a shift in perspective. You must begin seeing family relationships through the same lens you apply to any other relationship: mutual respect and healthy boundaries. This does not mean abandoning compassion. It means recognizing that compassion and self-protection are not opposites. One of the most powerful traps in toxic family dynamics is what can be called the family loyalty myth. Many people believe that because someone is family, they must tolerate behavior they would never accept from anyone else. They feel guilty when they attempt to establish limits. They worry that protecting themselves means betraying their family. But loyalty does not require accepting harm. You can care about someone and still refuse to participate in behavior that damages your emotional health. In fact, setting boundaries often creates the possibility for healthier family relationships. When destructive behavior is tolerated without consequences, it tends to continue indefinitely. But when limits are established, the dynamic changes. Another complicated aspect of family toxicity involves toxic parents. Parents play a powerful role in shaping identity. Their approval, criticism, and expectations influence how children view themselves for years. When parents behave in manipulative or controlling ways, those patterns can leave lasting psychological effects. Some parents constantly criticize their children even in adulthood. Others attempt to control life decisions such as careers, relationships, or finances. Some rely on guilt to maintain influence, reminding their children of sacrifices made in the past. These dynamics can create intense emotional pressure. Adult children may feel obligated to tolerate behavior that undermines their confidence or independence. Breaking free from these patterns requires recognizing an important truth. Gratitude for the past does not require surrendering your autonomy in the present. Parents may have provided care and support during childhood. That care deserves appreciation. But appreciation does not mean accepting ongoing manipulation or control. Healthy adult relationships, even with parents, require mutual respect. Siblings can also create complex, toxic dynamics. Sibling rivalry often begins in childhood, fueled by competition for parental attention or approval. In some families, These patterns persist into adulthood, transforming into jealousy, criticism, or subtle attempts to undermine each other. For example, a sibling who feels overshadowed by another's achievements may respond with sarcasm or dismissive comments. Another may attempt to recreate childhood roles by expecting one sibling to remain the responsible caretaker while they avoid accountability. These patterns often feel deeply ingrained because they have existed for years, but they can be changed. One effective method is what can be called the family role reset. Instead of automatically responding according to your childhood role, you consciously choose a new response. If you were always the peacemaker, you may decide to stop mediating every argument. If you were always the responsible one, you may stop solving problems that others should handle themselves. Changing these responses can feel uncomfortable at first, because family members often expect the old patterns to continue. But over time, consistent behavior establishes a new dynamic. Family gatherings present another common challenge. Events such as holidays, reunions, or celebrations often bring together individuals with unresolved conflicts. The combination of history, expectations, and close proximity can easily trigger old patterns. Preparation becomes essential. Before attending family gatherings, consider the situations that typically create tension. Decide in advance how long you plan to stay, which topics you will avoid, and how you will respond if conversations become uncomfortable. Having a clear exit strategy is also helpful. If the environment becomes emotionally overwhelming, leaving early is not a failure. It is a boundary. Financial matters within families can introduce another layer of toxicity. Inheritance discussions, financial support, or shared property can trigger intense conflict. Money often represents more than material value. It represents power, fairness, and recognition within the family system. Approaching these situations strategically is important. Whenever possible, treat financial decisions as formal agreements rather than emotional negotiations. Written documentation, clear expectations, and professional advice can prevent misunderstandings that might otherwise escalate into long-term family disputes. Another useful strategy in family relationships is information boundaries. Toxic relatives sometimes use personal information to create drama or exert influence. Sharing sensitive details about your finances, relationships, or career decisions may invite unwanted criticism or interference. Limiting what information you share does not mean you are hiding your life. It simply means protecting aspects of your life that others may misuse. Finally, remember that as an adult, you have the ability to redefine what family means to you. Family does not have to be limited to biological relationships. Many people build strong support networks through friendships, mentors, partners, and chosen communities. These chosen relationships often provide the emotional support and respect that biological family relationships sometimes lack. Balancing these two forms of family, biological and chosen, allows you to honor your history while also protecting your future. Because ultimately, the goal is not to reject family. The goal is to create relationships where respect, support, and growth are possible. And when toxic behavior threatens those values, the courage to establish boundaries becomes one of the most important acts of self-respect you can make. Chapter 13. Building a toxic-proof life system. Once you learn how to recognize toxic behavior and respond to it strategically, a deeper question begins to emerge. How do you reduce the chances of toxic people gaining influence in your life in the first place? The ultimate goal is not simply surviving toxic interactions. The ultimate goal is designing a life where toxic behavior has very little space to operate. This requires building systems. Many people move through life passively accepting whatever social environment happens to surround them. They interact with whoever appears in their workplace, neighborhood, or family circle without deliberately shaping the social ecosystem around them. But highly successful individuals approach relationships differently. They curate their environment. The first step toward building a toxic-proof life is conscious social curation. This means becoming intentional about the people who receive access to your time, attention, and emotional energy. Instead of assuming that every relationship deserves equal investment, you evaluate how each person affects your life. After spending time with someone, ask yourself simple questions. Do I feel energized or drained? Do conversations with this person encourage growth or reinforce negativity? Do they respect my boundaries or repeatedly challenge them? Patterns become clear quickly when you pay attention to these signals. People who consistently encourage progress deserve more access to your time. People who repeatedly introduce drama or negativity deserve less. This process is not about judgment or exclusion. It is about alignment. Your environment influences your behavior more than most people realize. When you are surrounded by individuals who value discipline, growth, and accountability, those qualities naturally strengthen within you. But when you are surrounded by individuals who normalize conflict, gossip, and manipulation, those patterns slowly infiltrate your environment. The second component of a toxic-proof life is environmental design. Your physical and digital spaces shape how others interact with you. Consider your physical environment first. Is your workspace organized and intentional, or chaotic and reactive? Do your living spaces create calm and focus, or constant distraction? Environments that reflect clarity tend to discourage disruptive behavior. People instinctively behave differently in spaces that communicate structure and purpose. Your digital environment is equally important. Modern communication technology allows toxic individuals to demand attention at any time of day. Constant notifications, endless messaging, and social media interactions can create an environment where boundaries are difficult to maintain. Taking control of these systems is essential. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Establish specific times for responding to messages. Use tools that allow you to filter communication so that urgent matters reach you without exposing you to constant distraction. Digital boundaries are as important as physical ones. The third element of a toxic-proof life is communication gatekeeping. Many people feel obligated to respond immediately to every request, question, or invitation. This habit makes their attention freely available to anyone who demands it. But when attention is always accessible, toxic individuals can easily exploit it. Gatekeeping introduces structure. Instead of responding instantly, you establish clear channels for communication. Meetings are scheduled rather than spontaneous. Messages are answered during designated periods rather than throughout the entire day. This system protects your focus while still allowing healthy relationships to function. Another powerful component of a toxic-proof life is building a strong support network. Toxic individuals often target people who appear isolated. When someone lacks supportive relationships, manipulative individuals can position themselves as the primary source of connection or influence. A diverse support network prevents this. Your network should include different types of relationships: mentors who guide your development, peers who share your ambitions, friends who provide emotional support, and professionals who offer objective perspective. These connections create balance. When one relationship becomes challenging, others provide stability. Strong networks also provide accountability. If someone attempts to manipulate or gaslight you, trusted individuals can offer outside perspective that reinforces your clarity. The fifth system involves defining personal standards. Personal standards are the behaviors you accept and the behaviors you refuse to tolerate in your life. Many people operate without clearly defined standards. They adjust their expectations depending on the situation or the person involved. This inconsistency creates confusion that toxic individuals exploit. When your standards are clear, your decisions become simpler. You no longer debate whether disrespect is acceptable in certain circumstances. You already know the answer. These standards guide your boundaries, your communication, and your level of engagement in relationships. Another powerful framework is the energy investment portfolio. Think of your emotional energy as a financial investment. Just as investors allocate money into assets that produce returns, you allocate emotional energy into relationships that produce positive outcomes. Healthy relationships generate returns such as encouragement, collaboration, inspiration, and mutual growth. Toxic relationships function like failing investments. They consume energy without producing meaningful benefits. Over time, wise investors move their resources away from failing assets. The same principle applies to relationships. Gradually reducing energy investment in draining relationships allows you to redirect that energy toward people and activities that create value in your life. Finally, building a toxic-proof life requires continuous learning. Human behavior evolves. New environments introduce new challenges. Toxic individuals adapt their tactics as social structures change. Staying protected requires ongoing awareness. Observe patterns. Reflect on past interactions. Identify what strategies worked and what could be improved. Each difficult encounter becomes a lesson that strengthens your psychological resilience. Over time, these systems create a powerful transformation. Toxic people may still appear occasionally, but they find little room to operate. Your boundaries are clear. Your environment discourages manipulation. Your network provides support. Your attention remains protected. Instead of constantly managing difficult personalities, you spend most of your energy building the life you want. And that is the true purpose of mastering these skills. Not to fight endless battles with toxic individuals, but to design a life where those battles rarely occur. Chapter 14. Recovery and rebuilding after toxic relationship damage. Escaping toxic relationships is only part of the journey. For many people, the deeper challenge begins after the toxic influence is removed. When someone has spent months or years in environments filled with manipulation, criticism, or emotional instability, the effects do not disappear immediately. Toxic relationships often leave psychological residue. You may find yourself doubting your own decisions. You may feel unusually cautious in new relationships. Simple disagreements may trigger anxiety because they remind you of past conflicts. This does not mean you are weak. It means your mind adapted to protect itself in a difficult environment. Understanding this is the first step toward recovery. Toxic dynamics often erode confidence gradually. Repeated criticism can distort self-perception. Manipulation can cause you to question your own memory or judgment. Over time, you may begin second-guessing your instincts. Psychologists sometimes describe this state as emotional disorientation, when someone repeatedly tells you that your reactions are unreasonable or that your memory is incorrect. The brain begins searching constantly for confirmation. Instead of trusting your perception of events, you start looking outward for validation. Recovery involves reversing this process. One powerful method is reality recalibration. Reality recalibration begins by documenting your experiences. Keeping a journal allows you to record thoughts, observations, and emotional responses without immediately questioning them. This practice strengthens your ability to trust your interpretation of events again. When you review your own written reflections over time, patterns become clearer. You begin recognizing when your instincts were accurate and when certain behaviors repeatedly signaled danger. Another important part of recovery is boundary reconstruction. People who have spent long periods accommodating toxic individuals often lose touch with their own preferences. They become accustomed to prioritizing other people's needs to avoid conflict. Rebuilding boundaries begins with small actions. You may start by expressing simple preferences, choosing where to eat, deciding how to spend your time, or declining requests that do not align with your priorities. These small decisions restore your sense of agency. Over time, these choices strengthen your confidence in larger decisions. Another essential element of recovery is developing self-compassion. Toxic individuals frequently plant seeds of self-criticism in the minds of those around them. Even after the relationship ends, those internal voices may remain. You might hear thoughts such as, "Maybe I overreacted," or "Maybe I should have handled things better." Self-compassion interrupts this pattern. When negative self-talk appears, pause and ask yourself an important question. Would you say the same words to a close friend who had experienced the same situation? Most people quickly realize that their internal dialogue is far harsher than the way they treat others. Replacing criticism with balanced self-reflection allows healing to begin. Recovery also involves rebuilding trust. After experiencing manipulation or betrayal, it is natural to become cautious in new relationships. Some people respond by trusting no one. Others swing to the opposite extreme, trusting too quickly in an attempt to restore normalcy. Healthy trust lies between these extremes. Trust should be built gradually. Observe how people behave over time. Notice whether their actions align with their words. Pay attention to how they respond when boundaries are expressed. Trust grows when consistency appears. This process may feel slow at first, but it creates relationships built on stability rather than assumption. Another key aspect of healing is relationship skill rehabilitation. Toxic environments often prevent people from developing healthy communication patterns. When interactions revolve around manipulation or conflict avoidance, important skills such as honest dialogue, emotional regulation, and balanced compromise may weaken. Practicing these skills with supportive individuals can restore confidence. Conversations that encourage mutual respect and open communication rebuild trust in your ability to maintain healthy connections. Some individuals benefit from structured support during this process. Therapists, coaches, or support groups can provide valuable perspective. Speaking with others who understand the effects of toxic dynamics can help normalize the recovery process. But regardless of the path you take, the ultimate goal is the same: restoring personal power. Toxic relationships often create the illusion that your well-being depends on someone else's behavior. Recovery dismantles that illusion. Each time you make an independent decision, set a boundary, or trust your instincts, you reinforce the reality that your life belongs to you. Personal power does not return all at once. It rebuilds gradually through consistent actions. You begin noticing that situations which once caused anxiety now feel manageable. Conversations that once drained your energy now feel neutral. Decisions that once required external approval now come naturally. This transformation marks the true end of toxic influence. It is important to remember that recovery is rarely a straight line. Some days you may feel confident and strong. Other days, old doubts may return unexpectedly. These fluctuations are normal. Healing is a process of gradual recalibration rather than instant transformation. What matters most is persistence. Each step forward strengthens your resilience, and over time, the experiences that once felt like damage begin to reveal themselves as something else entirely. Lessons. Lessons about boundaries. Lessons about human behavior. Lessons about the importance of protecting your energy and attention. These lessons do not erase the past, but they transform it. Instead of defining your future through pain, you use the experience to develop wisdom, and that wisdom becomes one of your most powerful forms of protection moving forward. Chapter 15. Maintaining your edge. How successful people stay protected while building their future. At some point, a deeper realization begins to emerge. Toxic people will never completely disappear from the world. No matter how successful you become, no matter how carefully you curate your environment, you will occasionally encounter individuals who attempt to manipulate, criticize, undermine, or control. The true goal is not to eliminate these encounters entirely. The true goal is to ensure that these encounters never slow your momentum. This is where the final level of mastery begins. Successful individuals develop a mindset that allows them to keep building, growing, and advancing, even when surrounded by difficult personalities. They do not waste energy trying to create perfect environments. Instead, they develop systems that make them psychologically untouchable. One of the most important of these systems is strategic detachment. Strategic detachment means caring deeply about your mission while remaining emotionally neutral toward the opinions of individuals who do not support that mission. Many people unintentionally sabotage their own progress because they are too invested in being liked. They want approval from everyone around them. When someone criticizes their decisions or questions their goals, they feel compelled to justify themselves. But approval is not required for progress. Strategic detachment allows you to evaluate feedback objectively. If criticism contains useful information, you apply it. If it is driven by jealousy, insecurity, or manipulation, you discard it without emotional investment. This discipline protects your focus. Another powerful concept is the competitive advantage of emotional stability. In competitive environments, many people become distracted by interpersonal conflict. They react emotionally to criticism. They become consumed by office politics or social drama. While they are doing this, something important happens. Their focus shifts away from creation. The individual who maintains emotional stability during these moments gains an advantage. Instead of wasting energy on conflict, they continue investing that energy into skill development, strategic thinking, and productive work. Over time, this advantage compounds. Years later, the difference becomes dramatic. The person who stayed focused builds expertise, influence, and credibility. The person who remained trapped in conflict finds themselves wondering why progress slowed. Another powerful strategy is energy amplification. Instead of allowing toxic encounters to drain motivation, successful individuals reinterpret them as confirmation that their growth is creating attention. When someone attempts to undermine your progress, it often reflects their discomfort with the direction you are moving. Your progress may highlight their own stagnation. Rather than reacting with frustration, you recognize the situation as evidence that you are moving forward. Their criticism becomes background noise rather than emotional disruption. Another layer of protection involves network leverage. As your influence grows, your relationships become a powerful shield. Strong professional networks create environments where toxic behavior carries greater consequences. When people know that you are respected and supported by others, they become more cautious about attacking your credibility. Building these networks requires authenticity. You do not build protective alliances through gossip or manipulation. You build them through consistent integrity, reliability, and contribution. When people recognize your character and work ethic, they become natural allies. Another essential practice is advanced documentation and reputation management. As your success grows, the stakes of toxic behavior increase. Instead of simple criticism, individuals may attempt to damage your reputation, interfere with opportunities, or distort your work. Maintaining clear records of commitments, communications, and accomplishments ensures that your professional narrative remains accurate. This is not paranoia, it is protection. Successful individuals understand that reputation is one of their most valuable assets. They protect it carefully. Another powerful element of long-term success is developing influence and authority. When you gain authority, whether in business, leadership, or community roles, you gain the ability to shape environments. You can create cultures that discourage toxic behavior. You can establish standards for communication and accountability. You can build teams where respect and collaboration become the norm. In this way, your success becomes protective not only for yourself, but for others as well. This leads to another important principle: legacy thinking. When toxic individuals attempt to provoke you, it can be tempting to respond emotionally. But legacy thinking introduces a broader perspective. You ask yourself how your response will look years from now. Will it reflect integrity, discipline, and strategic thinking? Or will it reveal impulsive reactions that distract from your mission? This perspective encourages responses that reinforce your long-term identity rather than temporary emotional satisfaction. Finally, many successful individuals integrate mentorship and teaching into their journey. Once you have developed the ability to navigate toxic environments effectively, you become a resource for others who are still struggling. Sharing your knowledge strengthens communities. It creates networks of individuals who understand healthy boundaries and strategic thinking. Teaching these skills also reinforces your own mastery. Because every time you explain how to manage toxic behavior, you remind yourself why these principles matter. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. The presence of toxic individuals no longer feels threatening. You recognize the patterns quickly. You adjust your responses automatically. Their attempts to provoke reaction no longer penetrate your emotional core. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by these encounters, you see them for what they truly are: predictable human behavior. And once behavior becomes predictable, it becomes manageable. The ultimate measure of success is not simply achieving goals. It is achieving them while maintaining your integrity, your focus, and your peace of mind. Toxic individuals may appear throughout your journey. But when you possess the awareness, strategies, and resilience described in this guide, their influence becomes limited. You continue building, you continue learning, you continue moving forward, and every step you take proves something powerful. Integrity combined with strategy will always outlast manipulation. Your ability to rise above toxic behavior without becoming toxic yourself is one of the clearest demonstrations of true strength. Conclusion. Throughout this journey, one central truth has appeared again and again. Toxic people are a permanent part of human environments. They appear in workplaces, families, friendships, and public spaces. They take different forms: manipulators, controllers, critics, and chronic victims. Some operate loudly, others quietly. But the presence of toxic individuals is not the defining factor of your life. Your response is. Many people spend years attempting to change toxic individuals. They hope that patience, explanation, or emotional effort will eventually transform destructive behavior. But the reality is different. The greatest transformation occurs not when others change, but when you change the way you engage with them. When you understand toxic behavior, confusion disappears. When confusion disappears, emotional reactions lose their power. And when emotional reactions disappear, toxic individuals lose the leverage they once had over your attention. You begin to see manipulation as a predictable pattern rather than a personal attack. You establish boundaries without guilt. You protect your time and energy with clarity. Instead of being pulled into endless cycles of conflict, you redirect your focus toward creation. You invest energy in relationships that strengthen you. You build environments that support your goals. You design systems that protect your mental clarity. This shift does not make you cold or indifferent. It makes you deliberate. You remain capable of compassion, but compassion no longer requires self-sacrifice. You remain open to connection, but connection no longer requires tolerating disrespect. You become selective about where your attention goes, and attention is the foundation of every meaningful achievement. Your career, your relationships, your creativity, and your personal growth all depend on where you invest your mental energy. When that energy is constantly diverted into conflict and manipulation, progress slows. But when that energy is protected, something remarkable happens. Your focus deepens, your decisions become clearer, your confidence strengthens, and your ability to create meaningful outcomes expands dramatically. This is why mastering the skill of handling toxic individuals is not merely about defense. It is about freedom. Freedom to think clearly. Freedom to pursue your goals without constant distraction. Freedom to build relationships based on respect rather than obligation. The individuals who achieve the most meaningful success in life are not those who avoid every difficult person. They are the ones who understand human behavior deeply enough to remain steady in any environment. They learn to observe rather than react. They learn to protect their peace without losing their compassion. They learn to move forward regardless of who stands in their way. And that is the final lesson. Toxic individuals may exist in the world, but they do not have the authority to determine the direction of your life. That authority belongs to you. Protect your energy. Protect your focus. Protect your values. And continue moving forward with the quiet confidence of someone who understands that success is not defined by the obstacles that appear along the way. It is defined by the discipline to keep building despite them.